Would you like to see something strange? Come with us and you will see. It's our time at Halloween. Yes, it's Halloween. Yes, it's Halloween. Halloween, scream dead at night. This is Halloween. Everybody makes a trick or treat to lose your time. It's our time. Everybody's free. It's time at Halloween. I am wondering if you're dead. Deep girl shopping, eyes open. I am wondering if you're safe. Feels like 665 in my head. This is Halloween. This is Halloween, 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 Halloween. Next time we come home, everyone has a pumpkin song. In this town, don't we love it now? Everybody's waiting for the next surprise. Love that good and bad, happy in the trash, and something's waiting for the house to now. You're scared, this is Halloween, you're scared. Aren't you scared? Well, that's just why. Run with the dead of night. Everybody's screaming, everybody's screaming. Until my face, hear the flash and bomb on trees. I am the cold who's dead. I am the midnight really I am the shadow of the moon at night, getting your dreams filled with fright. This is Halloween, this is Halloween, 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 Halloween. Tender lovelies everywhere, lights no fun without a scare. Let's all show what we're gonna be in our town of Halloween. In this town, don't be loud now, everyone's waiting for the next surprise. Skeleton Jack might get you tonight. Swing on the magic and you too bad, you're ashamed. This is Halloween, everyone's ashamed. Please make way for my next special guy. I don't know, child, keep on looking back. Everyone hail to the pumpkin king. This is Halloween, this is Halloween. We come home, everyone has their pumpkin
Greetings, folks. Welcome to All-State Soliloquy, where if you like our sidebars, then you'll love this.
Grammarly does more than catch errors. With
Fuck you, Grammarly. As often stated, we don't have a sponsor. Stop trying to force yourself in the position where there isn't one.
That's
Stop
fine,
trying
man.
to sponsor rape us.
Yeah. Right. So welcome to our October-themed month, where we'll give a month-long celebration to one of our favorite holidays. With me is my intellectual superior and good friend, the Authenticator, aka Dalton L. Mortenmeyer.
Good evening, folks. One week until the big night of the year there. Speaking of.
I still need to put up my fucking decorations and carve the pumpkin I got.
I need to decide actually what I'm doing Halloween-wise as far as rituals go. I think I'm going to bust out a set of like incense and ingredients and shit I have that are all dragon blood themed. That seems like a good idea.
Right. And I'm your host / zombie lover, the brainstormer of pop culture. Well, how is everyone doing this fine Hallows Eve month night?
I am doing fine. It kind of snuck up on me that Halloween is exactly 1 week away, and I still need to do my Halloween themed episode for a Mystic Theologue.
I did one of the videos I have planned for October. I posted it today on my main channel, Brainstormer Pop Culture. So go check that one out. It's Brainstormer Pitches Hollowville. It's about 4 minutes long. I think that's actually like one of the shortest videos I've done on my channel.
Yeah, that's a good question. What is the shortest video I've done? Aside from like the cameos I've done for other people's videos, which only tend to last like 5 minutes, the shortest actual episode of anything I've made was like 12 minutes long, I want to say, like 11 minutes maybe.
Right. So, due to time, we are going to have one topic, but there are a few just a lot of questions for that topic itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, the topic of this offstage soliloquy is zombies and the zombie genre. It's actually one of my favorite genres. It's underneath slashers.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the first one is history of zombies. And Dalton, would you care to elaborate on the kind of occult nature of zombies?
Okay, yes, I can definitely do that. This is one of kind of my stock areas of expertise where pop culture and the occult are concerned. Um, the word zombie actually comes from an African word, which was zombi, which is sort of a take on the term around that same area for basically an evil spirit. As it pertains to like our modern definition of zombie, a zombie refers to a corpse that has been resurrected by mystical means, usually by a priest of voodoo or voodoo, which of course is the African antecedent to modern day Western voodoo. The idea essentially is you conjure up a ghost, you bind that ghost back to its own body or uh a body that you have designated as the substitute for the substitute body for the spirit. Then you bind the spirit to the body and then raise said spirit to do your bidding. Usually though, most of the time people cheat by essentially um, dosing a person with hypnotic drugs and then essentially hypnotically enslaving them. But yeah, that's the sort of default parameters for the zombie is any corpse that is resurrected by mystical means, although it usually pertains to African shamanism and folk magic, because that's actually where the word zombie comes from.
Neat.
Yeah.
So, and kind of to play up my expertise in cinematic history. Unfortunately, that I am a little less knowledgeable than I'd like to admit. When it comes to the zombie cinema history, but I am aware that there were, I believe, at least one movie that came before George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead.
Yes. Oh, they're coming to get you, Barbara fame.
I haven't seen that, and I feel bad that I haven't, and I really should. I know that.
There is a geek part of me that wants to shame you for that, but I will restrain it for the moment.
I shame myself.
Shame.
Yeah. But I believe it is called White Zombie. Came out sometime before George A. Romero's, which I believe came out in the 60s. This one came out in the 50s.
I would imagine it goes back a little bit further than that. I remember, well, at the very least, in terms of like necromancy, movies have contained elements of necromancy since like the silent era, but I think it was around the 50s when anthropologists started doing research into parts of Haiti and Africa where the zombie concept sort of is taking root from. Um,
1932. So that was my
Yeah.
bad.
that it sort of became a word in common parlance. And of course, a large part of the modern love for zombies is almost exclusively due to George A. Romero, who was a genius of the sort of B horror movie genre.
Uh-huh. And there have been plenty others that have kind of, you know, one could say the genre has become oversaturated in the years after. And Tehillim 29, Zombie Sorcerer Supreme, maybe the Mummy Sorcerer Supreme. Are those movies, Tehillim?
I think he's just talking in the comics, and I actually wouldn't mind seeing Encanto the Living Mummy as Sorcerer Supreme. It wouldn't bug me as much as some of the other cockamamie options that they've come out with in recent years.
Right. So, you'll have to forgive me, guys. I'm so
Although I do think that if Encanto was the Sorcerer Supreme of the Marvel Universe, all those people who constantly want to inflame the Doctor Strange versus Doctor Fate lore would have a field day, because of course Encanto is Egyptian and therefore his magic is primarily Egyptian in nature. So yeah, that would be hilarious just for the sake of the haphazard casuals that would immediately get into a flame war, and I would just be sitting there going, I'm going to be very amused by this.
Yeah. So yeah, obviously after certain movies that came out before the 1960s, there was Night of the Living Dead by George A. Romero. And unfortunately, again, I have not seen it, and I feel extremely bad that I haven't. And that is where the zombie genre was kind of not technically born, but was given spotlight to.
It reached its broader audience under the direction of Romero, and so much the better, because again, George A. Romero was a genius of the B horror movie.
Yeah.
So much of what we as a culture remember of B 1950s and 1960s cinema was from things like The Night of the Living Dead.
I have seen some of the sequels to George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead.
Okay, so wait, you've seen some of the sequels to Night of the Living Dead before Night of the Living Dead?
Yes.
That's very confusing.
Yes, it is. But and I mean, I could try and list the zombie movies that kind of were made popular because they were zombie movies after Night of the Living Dead, but we'd be here forever.
We would be here until this next year's Halloween, and probably a significant portion after that.
Yeah. So just kind of going through the kind of trademarks of the genre were kind of not I kind of guess revitalized, or like kind of was like a pinnacle of the genre during the time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here's the interesting sort of catch-22 of the zombie genre. Because Romero made most of his movies at the height of the Cold War, there was a bit of socio-political commentary that was intermingled with the zombie, in the sense of, usually in that era, the source of the resurrection wasn't necromancy as it is traditionally. It was something to do with nuclear explosion slash biological warfare. And personally, as someone who, practices magic and studies the occult and shit, I kind of hate this. I would prefer if the zombie was treated with kind of the respect it deserved and tied back to its necromantic roots. But I do think that a large part of what made the zombie genre so popular in the 50s and 60s was its connection to sort of the nuclear anxiety, in the same way that a large part of what made Godzilla popular in the Western world was because it fed off of the nuclear anxiety, because for a hot minute there, everyone was convinced the world was going to end. And to be fair, they had semi-solid reasons to. And of course, nuclear annihilation is an ever present threat, because humans are idiots and we shouldn't have the power of the sun, but we do, because reasons. Mostly because Einstein got afraid of what the Nazis were going to do with nukes if they got there first. So, for those that are worried about nukes, blame Albert Einstein and then forget him, because to be fair, either the Americans were going to get nukes at some point, or the British were going to get nukes at some point, or the Germans were going to get nukes at some point. And I kind of am horrified by the notion that the Nazis would have gotten there first.
Personally, I don't mind both ideas. I would prefer, since we've kind of gone down the kind of virus, biological sort of thing so much, I would think it'd be nice to go to the necromancy occult route, kind of give it a little kick in the butt.
I think that one of the reasons the reason why zombies differentiated as much as they did with the biological aspect and the nuclear aspect is because without the biological aspect and the nuclear aspect of zombie folk, I can't even call it folklore because it's not based on any kind of lore. Without that being part of the zombie sort of aesthetic, they're too similar to vampires. And basically, without the nuclear and biological aspect of the zombie as part of the mythos, they're basically vampires, but without all the cool shit. Because a zombie is just a resurrected corpse. A zombie doesn't have like the powers of the vampire or the blood drinking aspect. To be fair though, I think the first scientific zombie, quote unquote, in modern literature and culture probably goes back as far as Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Although to be fair, Mary Shelley based her Frankenstein story on an older folk legend, and in the older folk legend she based her story on, the doctor in question used alchemy, not science, to resurrect a corpse. So there's that. It's kind of important to remember, and I think a lot of people forget, but Frankenstein as a concept was born out of two things. One was Mary and a bunch of her friends getting together as like a social event to tell each other ghost stories, and Mary won the ghost story contest, and then she decided to turn it into a novel. The other thing was Mary Shelley sort of informally studied medicine and attended open lectures at a lot of different medical schools. And around that same time, scientists were experimenting with electricity as a means to revitalize organic tissue. So she would go to public demonstrations of these Victorian doctors using electricity to make corpses convulse, and even sometimes you'd get, if the corpse was fresh enough, you could even get them to like open and close their hands, or even a couple of times they were so fresh that they managed to get the corpse to sit up straight as an aspect of rigor mortis. So those are the two main influences of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, a ghost story that she repackaged to win a ghost story competition amongst her socialite friends, and the the electrical craze at the time to see if they could revitalize organic tissue. But in all actuality, Frankenstein was probably the first literary zombie to be more science-based than necromancy-based.
I need to read that book.
You do. I think a lot of people could benefit from reading the book, because as great as the movie is, they kind of ruin Frankenstein as a character, because in the movie and a lot of the material that's based on the movie, the monster is basically a hulking, brutish creature who can't really think for itself, and mostly probably because of the brain rotting and whatnot. But in the novel, it was sort of a commentary on scientific humanism, and so the person that the doctor created was actually better than most humans, intellectually speaking. He was sort of the ideal Platonic human. The only major imperfection the monster in the novel had was that he was ugly, and that ugliness led to him being mistreated because people are shallow fuckwits. So if anything, it's kind of a cliche to say this, but in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Victorian humans are the monsters more than the creature created from stitching together bits of corpses is the monster. I think that if the monster was treated with some kind of respect, he would have essentially become an ideal human. Because it's important to remember that the subtitle for Frankenstein was The New Prometheus. The sort of reference there being Prometheus was the guy in mythology who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. And in the novel, Frankenstein, the doctor, not the creature, was essentially trying to steal the quality of giving life to things from God and give it to humanity. So, if anything, even Mary Shelley kind of acknowledged that the monster of Frankenstein is the doctor, not the creature that he made. Frankenstein is a very sad story when you get right down to it, because the doctor basically manages to create the perfect being, but because said perfect being is just a little bit too ugly, it gets shunned and shamed and almost burned alive because nobody likes it. And then when it finally just says, fuck it, if people want me to be the monster, I'll be the monster, he gets treated like a monster because he's doing monstrous things.
It's a vicious cycle. And I feel like today, if the monster actually existed, he would be fine.
Yeah, but between the advances we've made in plastic surgery, I think that and also the sort of loosening up of our stigmas on attractiveness, I don't think the monster would have any trouble at all being very popular. And in fact, in one of my favorite TV shows of recent years, Librarians, when the monster showed up, they basically convinced the monster to become a professional athlete, because of course the monster in the book was like 8 feet tall, and was extremely strong relative to normal humans. So like, and the monster's main sort of internal conflict in the novel was he just wanted to be loved. He wanted to be treated with dignity and affection, and no one would because he was hideous and shit. So in the librarians, they basically were like, for one thing, plastic surgery is a lot better now. You'd probably have a lot of success with that. And for another thing, you should go join a professional sports team because you will do extremely well and get a lot of people's affections as a result of that. So in the universe of librarians, the monster actually got a happy ending. It was both funny and also kind of heartwarming if you know the novel.
Yeah. That was an interesting sidebar, but kind of going back to the zombies. So the next question is, why have they endured for so long in pop culture?
I'm almost certain I'm not. In fact, I know I'm not the only person to have noticed this. But one of the funny things you see, especially recently, is the zombie as a concept became more popular as humans became more urbanized. I think there is a fear somewhere deep in the human psyche of large crowds and large swathes of people, and there's also a fear of the people around us being in some way unthinking. Um, and of course the notion of the zombie biting you and you yourself turning into one is something again that it has sort of in common with the vampire in the sense of something unnatural infecting you and making you yourself unnatural. But I do think there is a social element to the commentary of the zombie in the sense of we as humans place a lot of value as in my opinion we should on our ability to think, our ability to be individuals. So the idea of a creature whose specific qualities are that it is not thinking and that it is basically a herd animal and that it they move in large herds of large herds of unthinking mass essentially. I think that has a lot to do with it. We resent being cramped. I think the notion of being surrounded by a lot of unthinking, seemingly human creatures who are infectious makes us extremely paranoid and extremely claustrophobic and speaks to sort of ancient tribal instincts of those people over there are unthinking animal, while we civilized people over here are the one lone thinking humans, essentially.
Plus, being a zombie apocalypse would be pretty fucking awesome.
Hmm?
Well, being in a zombie apocalypse would also be pretty awesome. Relatively speaking.
I do think there is kind of a wish fulfillment thing going on with a lot of people who are loners and who don't quite fit in and who are very personal accountability and personal skill oriented. I think that's why as the zombie genre became more and more popular, it sort of inspired the doomsday prepping sort of subculture, because there's a notion that civilization makes most people too soft. Ironically, I think in the minds of a lot of people who consider themselves doomsday preppers, they see a lot in common between the qualities the zombie encourage in people and the qualities that normal humans just have now in general because of how we've kind of become domesticated as a society. And I think for those that aren't prone to domestication, for those that are too stubborn or too bold or too uh, skill and competence oriented to be caged by society, there's a wish fulfillment aspect of, well, if everything goes to shit, then I'll be the one person to survive because nobody else has the skills that I do. Wah. It's kind of a wish fulfillment of I'm the one who knows all the things and who makes the most sense. And if everyone's cushy lives were upended tomorrow, you'd all see how awesome I am, basically. That seems to be the sort of double-edged or the double-sided coin of the zombie genre. On the one hand, you have a creature who specifically exacerbates our primal fears of herd mentality and people around us being unthinking or people around us being subhuman. And then on the other side, you have the hero of the typical zombie apocalypse, who is a hyper individuated, hyper capable, hyper masculine in a lot of cases, rugged individualist who has skills that have sort of fallen out of fashion as human civilization has become more and more domesticated. And I think that sort of dichotomy, and what it says about our civilization, whether society makes us stronger or weaker, is a large part of what Romero brought to the zombie genre. I mean, there will always be an appeal to the idea of walking corpse because we as humans fear death and we are very uncomfortable with death and disease and rotting, which is, what happens to a corpse when it rots. So there will always be some fear that will be stroked by the zombie itself as a concept. But I think the additions that Romero made that made it more sort of tied to modernity and tied to how our society shapes us have been a large part of why it sticks so well. I mean, even just look at sort of the sort of modern spin on the zombie apocalypse hero in the form of Columbus from Zombieland versus Tallahassee from Zombieland. Tallahassee is a much more traditional rugged individualist with skills that have fallen out of fashion because society has domesticated people. He's a much more classical zombie apocalypse sort of hero as far as the movies and TV and shit goes. But Columbus, he has similar qualities to Tallahassee in that he's a loner and that he doesn't enjoy people and that he avoids dealing with other humans, but it's for a much different reason. In Tallahassee's case, it's because he essentially thinks that most other humans are wusses. In Columbus's case, it's because he's an intellectual who would just prefer doing his intellectual shit. And he's paranoid about social situations and he hates people because people are complicated and annoying rather than incompetent. And that's one of the reasons why of all of the zombie movies, I like Zombieland probably the most because it sort of, for one thing, it showed me and people like me, I imagine, that we would in fact have a place in a zombie apocalypse, and it wouldn't all just be the rugged individualist redneck who spends his time learning how to trap shit and things. But also it kind of mocks that power fantasy of, well, if everyone would just stop being wusses for 5 minutes, everything would be awesome because, if society weren't as comfortable, it would be the people who do all the uncomfortable shit that would survive the best. But Zombieland looks at it and goes, no. By your own criteria, you'd also end up with a lot of bookish shut-ins who would just know how to avoid people on principle because of anxiety and shit. It was essentially the Revenge of the Nerds equivalent of the zombie movie.
Yep.
Also, I could totally see myself living by a set of rules similar to Columbus. That is probably my favorite aspect of that movie, though, the rules he comes up with, because they're so affirming to all of my idiosyncrasies.
I still haven't seen the sequel yet.
I pirated it, no shame, and I found it to be not as good as the original. Like,
Well, I kind of expected that, just on the fact that Zombieland, the first one, it's like with Deadpool and like Kingsman and like those movies. You strike gold once, you think you can do it again. It's just, I think, and it's kind of my gripe with a lot of modern sequels. What I've seen from the trailer is that they try to put too much in it, and it doesn't always work out.
they tried to be too self-referential. Like, hey, you remember this thing that you liked in the original because it was so original and organic and out of the box? Well, we were going to repeat that exact gag again in a new way, and it's somehow still going to be original in our minds. I don't know how. Like that was the big problem with Double Tap for me. Was it seemed more like the characters were doing things that like fan fiction writers would have them do rather than what they would actually do.
Well, okay. To clarify, by fan fiction writer, do you mean the kind of?
I don't mean people like you who actually treat the opportunity for fan fiction as an opportunity for good fiction in general. I mean the cheesy, self-referential, basically parody writers that.
So basically, like stereotypical, like how everyone would views fan fiction writers.
The stereotypical fan fiction writer. I don't mean you, because you treat all fiction like it should be as good as possible, whether it be fan or otherwise. But most people are just like, this is my fan fiction, so I can make it however I want to. Where?
God, those people are fucking idiots.
Yeah, it can get really boring really quickly.
I slaved over 5 chapters of a fan fiction, and it took me like months for each one.
Yes, and as a result, I'm sure that they were worth reading as opposed to 90% of the other fan fiction on the internet.
First chapter, I think, was kind of a problem. I overtly described things.
Well, but that's less of a fan fiction problem, more of a just kind of growing pains of being a writer problem.
Well, keep in mind, I wrote that in 2017.
Yeah, so you were 17 at the time then.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Okay, so moving on. Has the genre become stale?
I think so, yes. If anything, Double Tap kind of confirmed that for me. Like, because Zombieland is still, like I say, one of my favorite zombie movies, and I'll just pop it in sometimes because it's an enjoyable movie. But if anything, Double Tap showed just how running on steam the zombie genre is at this point.
Right.
I think my preferred solution would be get the zombie genre back to its roots and play more with the supernatural element. But given that that's kind of one of my solutions to basically everything, I'm going to check my own biases and leave it at that. But that being said, I am fucking sick to death of the virus version and the nuclear waste version of the zombie. Sick to death of it.
Yes, I agree with Don. I do think it's become stale. Not exactly for his reasonings, obviously. Mine is, it's just I feel like they don't know exactly what to do. Like it's always the initial outbreak, or like sometime later, but it doesn't really feel like. when they do the sometime later thing, it still feels like
there's no creativity or anything. It's just generic zombie apocalypse number 1472 happened or is happening.
right.
And the generic stock characters that you see in every zombie movie are responding to that as a result. I do think a large part of what has made the zombie genre go as stale as it's gone is, if you remember, right before Walking Dead came out, the zombie genre was kind of on the downswing. And then The Walking Dead came out and basically hyperextended the zombie genre past its normal expiration or past the trend's normal expiration date. And now that Walking Dead has stopped being innovative and original, the entire zombie genre is crumbling around it. The zombie genre, ironically, has become a corpse of its former self.
I don't know. I think the later seasons have been pretty good for anything I've seen on like YouTube and stuff.
I'm amazed you didn't give me shit for that pun.
It's accurate. So, plus I don't have my soundboard open. So.
I thought for sure as soon as I said that, oh god, this is gonna give him a brain aneurysm.
But I guess we kind of answered my next question, which was problems with modern zombie storytelling and what could be done to fix it.
I think what the zombie genre needs to do is very similar to what the comic book genre is doing, albeit slowly, and that is do more shit than the bog standard version of your story. Like, Romero was great, but not every movie needs to be a spin on either Romero or the Dawn of the Dead.
Right. There was. See, my idea for a zombie storytelling for a zombie story is have it set like the initial zombie apocalypse happened, right? Set it in the world what comes after. Because I've always been interested in that. Like I like Dying Lights, like the second Dying Light game that hasn't come out yet, not to my knowledge anyway. It's set 15 years after the first game, and kind of how the world has changed and different and stuff. And you see that in the landscape and how people react and like stuff like that. Also, Z Nation, which I've talked about a few times on this channel.
Mm-hmm.
It has just this really wide, big world that feels like it's lived in, and everything in it seems like a natural progression of the initial outbreak.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got like lingo and stuff, and it's really fun and cool.
Mm-hmm. I think the best way of going about it is basically, again, following in the footsteps of what the comic book genre kind of does, or is kind of doing now. Have every zombie movie that comes out be kind of also subservient to a subgenre. Like, for example, there was a really, well, not really good, but decent movie that came out a couple years ago called Warm Bodies that was basically the zombie equivalent of a rom-com. That was really funny and that was really interesting. Not every zombie movie needs to be a spin on like the apocalyptic action genre. I'd like to see like a zombie mystery story, or a zombie fantasy, or something along those lines, or better yet, just a straight up zombie horror movie instead of a zombie apocalypse horror movie. And that's the thing. Take the zombie out of the apocalyptic setting for once. Make individual zombies scary again would be my biggest advice, because like I said, there's all that deliberate subtext for the zombie herd and the zombie horde and what have you, but the individual zombie really isn't that scary to to us anymore. At least not to the average moviegoer anymore. I'd like to see a take on a zombie where what was truly scary was the individual zombie again, rather than the socio-political context.
Right. It is kind of like mass, but I think individually they are also terrifying. The Rage zombies from 28 Days Later franchise.
Vague recollections of that, yes.
Yeah. They are fast, violent, and extremely brutal. A single
Yeah.
one. Imagine if they were a horde.
But then again, I don't necessarily think you need to change the zombie in order to make it scary. I don't think you need to make zombies fast and rage-filled in order to make them scary. I think the best way to do it would be to play on the human revulsion at death. Like the best way of doing it would be um to do a zombie body horror. Like, okay, imagine this concept for a movie, right? Okay, so you have a bottleneck movie where it's a guy sitting in a room, and that guy has been bitten by a zombie, and the entire duration of the movie is his mental state breaking down, and we'll see it from his perspective as he slowly and slowly turned into a zombie, and we actually get to see the like his flesh slowly rotting away in like a body horror style. That would be an interesting concept, like a zombie movie from a would-be zombie's perspective, someone who's actually becoming a zombie.
Also, plus check out a lot of short films on YouTube about zombies. There are a lot of good ones that I think story-wise could be feature-length films. Also, maybe a few more zombie comedies.
Yeah, I've had a zombie comedy in mind for a while, that I think would be funny. Like, okay, so you have your stereotypical like New England small town, right? And then you have a zombie apocalypse outbreak. And of course, because of the oversaturation of the zombie genre, all of the big tough guys yeah, and your stereotypical your Tallahassees, as you put it, or as you'd put it, go and get their guns and stock up on all this doomsday prepper shit, and it doesn't work. And why doesn't it work? Because the zombies in question are of the supernatural variety, which means when you shoot the supernatural zombie, it regenerates, it heals itself rather than being in any way affected by bullets. And then because I'm me, this kind of was inevitable. But you have the one loner supernatural obsessive kid know how to actually deal with real supernatural zombies and know exactly why all of the doomsday prepper based tough guy zombie approach is not working. That would be fucking funny, because you'd essentially have a small town worth of essentially doomsday prepper rednecks having to defer to the classic, bookish kid who actually knows shit. Maybe there's a little bit of self-insert ness in there as well for me, because this was a concept that was inspired by a lot of conversations I had with people in my high school during the height of the zombie craze. Like a bunch of like rednecks and jocks were sitting there talking about how they would react in a zombie apocalypse one day, and of course I pipe up with, well, if they were actual zombies in like the classical sense, bullets aren't going to do shit unless those bullets happen to be made of iron and silver. So you'd be fucked. I also think it would be interesting to have as part of that concept, people getting bored or riled up by zombies they can't kill and essentially burning them to destroy them, and then having to have them deal with the issue of, if you don't actually address the spiritual aspect of the zombie, all you'll get if you burn the corpse of a zombie is a vengeful spirit that's going to be clinging to you instead of a corpse. Because if you don't actually address the binding of the spirit that animates the zombie, then if you destroy the corpse, the ghost is just gonna haunt you like a stereotypical ghost, and then you're
Oh.
still fucked, even worse, because you
Dalton.
can't touch the damn thing. Sorry.
That's fine. It's just, I think, time-wise.
Right.
I had actually come up with this was years ago. Like, I was in middle school when I came up with this idea for a zombie comedy. It was called Zombie Control, where it was basically essentially the zombie.
Animal control with zombies.
Yes.
Mhm.
But yeah, so after the zombie apocalypse, everything kind of went back to normal. I mean, people still became zombies when they died or something. And essentially, some guy thought, hey, why not make a business out of killing someone's loved ones so they don't have to?
So the Exterminator from Over the Hedge meets Ghostbusters meets Zombieland, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. There was going to be a bigger storyline where basically a sentient zombie started to raise more zombies for an army.
Huh.
So yeah, taking a lot of inspiration from Ghostbusters now that I look back on it.
Well, I mean, as the old saying goes, if you need to steal from someone, steal from the best. You could do a lot worse than Ghostbusters.
Yeah. I had also, and I think I mentioned this to you before, early on, like during the month or maybe beforehand, I had started working on a zombie book series, where it basically takes
You did mention, I believe,
yeah.
Actually, yeah.
It takes place about 60 years after initial zombie apocalypse, and zombies were more of an elemental force than anything. It was going to be more of a story between. It was kind of going to be like a political thriller, if anything.
Interesting.
Well, for the first book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because basically two settlements were at war at one point, and basically now they're trying to figure out a treaty, but other elements are kind of forcing them to kind of be enemies again. So yeah. So we covered that. Good zombie movies and TV shows.
Like I said, I've always been a big fan of Zombieland. Warm Bodies is surprisingly good, despite the fact that it was born out of the Twilight ripoff craze from a couple years ago. Obviously, if you're going for the classics, go for Romero. Also, Shaun of the Dead and Mall of the Dead, and there's actually even a story called, or a movie called Detention of the Dead that I thought was pretty good. It's basically, what if uh, what if Cabin in the Woods didn't take place in a cabin in the woods, but took place in a high school with zombie children, and then the average, post um post breakfast club gaggle of high schoolers had to defend their school against what essentially amounted to a outbreak of zombie kids. I thought it was pretty funny. It's really cheesy and over the top, but if zombie movies are your thing, I think you'll get a kick out of it. And it's not the same as
Um,
I also heard good things about Scout's Guide to the Zombie Apocalypse, but I didn't think it was that great as far as zombie comedies go.
So in terms of shows, Z Nation. The first season, well, almost every season there is a different objective and stuff. But it's all very entertaining. It's by the guys who make Sharknado movies and also rip-off movies, The Asylum.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically enough, their original stuff is actually, in terms of a series, it's really good. You like it's very comedic. It's basically like The Walking Dead if they actually had zombie movies and stuff.
Okay, so sort of in the same vein as like a Cabin in the Woods or a Scream, but instead of just being all horror movies, it's with zombie movies.
Yeah,
I can work with that.
yeah. Again, like it travels across the United States, and this takes like I don't know, like maybe 8 or so years after a zombie apocalypse started.
Mm-hmm.
You get a guy who's essentially a zombie Jesus who can like talk and control zombies and stuff.
Zombie Jesus. Okay, that's hilarious.
The Murphy.
That like I it, all it makes me think of is the Adult Swim show Black Jesus. But
Yeah. They were also able to get. I think it was actually him, but George A. Romero as a zombie in the show.
fascinating, and it surprises me that it's taken that long to have George Romero actually guest star as a zombie in a thing. Although I think
No, not George A. Romero. George R. Martin.
I was gonna say because I thought I remember him dying a couple years ago. George Romero, that is. George R. Martin is still around, and he needs to finish the fucking 8th book already. But that's neither here nor there.
So yeah, it's really good, and like you do get emotionally invested into the characters, even though it's like super comedic and stuff.
Yeah, I was waiting for that because knowing you don't get into a show unless you get into the characters. It is not done.
Yeah, my favorite characters are one that's two, and they're kind of like the comedic relief, but also like just really good characters overall.
Mm-hmm.
Doc and 10K. The character of 10K is very fascinating on the fact that he takes the name 10K as the number of zombies you're going to kill, and over all the series, throughout the series, he counts how many zombies he kills. And it's been a while since I've seen the show. Unfortunately, I think it was canceled by Sci-Fi and picked up by Netflix.
That somehow doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, and Sci-Fi Channel sucks nowadays.
Wait, although to be fair, they've been kicking ass for a while now. Between The Expanse, which unfortunately got canceled and moved to I want to say
Amazon.
Hulu, and The Magicians and Deadly Class, I approve of the current spate of sci-fi writers and things. The Magicians is probably my favorite show currently on TV.
Yeah, so Z Nation is a really good one. I've never really gotten into The Walking Dead just on the fact that it seems so bleak and depressing.
I didn't really either of my own accord. See, basically, around the time Walking Dead first came out, my little brother was very into the zombie sort of doomsday prepping subgenre. So I got into it mostly out of regard for him more than anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've never it's never really jived with me. Like I've never I've never liked the characters on Walking Dead a whole hell of a lot. And of course, anytime I did start liking a character, they would die. Like I ended up liking, I think it was Herschel on The Walking Dead originally,
Ooh,
and then of course he died. Um, and all the characters that remain alive annoy me. So yeah, I've never really liked The Walking Dead.
yeah. So, what was I? Yeah. Honestly, don't. I think you really should give Z Nation a try. I think it has like the first 5 or so seasons on Netflix.
Oh, did it go on for that long?
Yes.
Dang, that's really good for a sci-fi show. Hopefully it is as good as you're building it up to be. Although I trust your sense of taste, so I'm sure it will be excellent. Also, sci-fi. If you cancel the Magicians before its run is done, I'm going to murder all of you.
Right. Also, well, you're also gonna like it. It just has a various degrees. Well, the zombies themselves, or Z's, or puppies and kittens as they're known,
Mm-hmm.
there are very different varieties of zombies. Like you have the initial ones, and then they start to kind of evolve throughout the series.
Yeah, and diversify and what have you. Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, you even have zombies that come back as that are still zombies, but are regular people that act like people.
Oh, get their personality back. That's interesting.
Yeah. So that's like in the later seasons, I believe. I'm just again, it's been a very long time. Like I think I stopped watching. There's actually an episode where they went to Roswell and Area 51.
Because in a world where society has crashed, what else are you gonna do?
Yeah. No
There's no one
aliens,
around
no,
to
but
stop you anymore, so Area 51 at Roswell it is. Of
but
course, according to current internet memes, society being still up isn't going to stop anyone from storming Area 51, like stupid motherfuckers.
mhm. Plus you also got like different like human villains and stuff. Like you had a cartel that sold weed that was grown from zombies.
Zombie weed.
Z weed, I believe it was called.
Why am I not surprised? And also, how has it taken anyone this long to come up with that concept? Given the crossover between fans of zombie movies and stoners, I am amazed, fucking amazed it has taken anyone that long to come up with that concept.
Yeah. So
It is an idea whose time has come, or had come, I guess.
also it's not afraid to kill off characters. Like even characters you really like or get used to.
Mm-hmm.
Like a stereotypical zombie story, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's just a bunch of fun, if I'm being honest. And lastly, last question before we move on to watch and review. What would you do in a zombie apocalypse?
I guess it depends on the kind of zombie. If it was
I think
the
I think I'm just like typical, like the atypical zombie apocalypse.
if it was the virus slash nuclear related zombie apocalypse, I think I'd be mostly fucked. If it was the mystical variety, then I would fare a lot better than I think most people would, and I would end up being the I or someone similar to me would probably be the one to discover the banishing spell that stops the zombies, actually.
Mhm.
But
Um,
that goes kind of back into my pitch for a zombie comedy, where like the stereotypical zombie hunter people try to do what they do and it doesn't fucking work because these are not those kind of zombies.
Hmm. Me, I would kind of be a nomad. I mean, if I didn't have anyone, if I did, I'd probably build up something, obviously.
I suspect that I would end up being the sort of group doctor or like the group status the group strategist if I found myself in a zombie apocalypse
Yeah, but
environment.
I would basically be a nomadic lawbringer.
Oh, so you'd try the bring order to the anarchy style of um
Okay, maybe not lawbringer, but like someone who goes around helping people when they need it.
so zombie apocalypse version of Mad Max, basically.
Pretty much.
Yeah,
And
I
I also
figured.
know my weapon.
Although I suspect by virtue of your weapon, you might ultimately start out trying to be that kind of good Samaritan character, and end up what you'd probably wind up somewhere between Casey Jones and Negan,
Shovel.
just because I know you and your tendencies, and I suspect that the wanton bloodshed of the zombie apocalypse would probably bring out your more confrontational tendencies.
But yeah, my weapon would be a shovel. On the fact that it can be both a kind of spear-like weapon and a blunt instrument.
Yeah, but you'd probably also have your bat because I know how much you love that bat, and I don't think you're gonna get rid of it.
So yeah, probably a cross between Negan and Chase Jones with
Yeah.
mask. I think I'd have to incorporate somehow to make sure my glasses fit comfortably when I wear a mask.
You really should look into contacts for the purposes of zombie apocalypse scenarios because I imagine glasses would get broken really easily in a zombie apocalypse, but contacts would be less annoying as long as you remember to put them in.
Uh-huh. Right. But yeah, pretty much that's how I would work.
Mm-hmm.
I'd also
Like
try
I
and
say,
steal,
yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
I'd also try and steal a muscle car.
Yeah, like I said, a little bit of your Mad Maxian tendencies there.
Plus, muscle cars are awesome. Like an old-fashioned Camaro or something like that.
Like I said, I suspect that in a world of a zombie apocalypse, I would end up being the modern day equivalent of like a feudal like village healer, which works because I have plenty of knowledge of herbal medicine and that kind of shit.
Yeah. All right, that is enough for us talking about zombies.
It
You
is.
know, secretly, I do wish one would happen.
If I end up having to fucking banish the dead because you got too giddy for a zombie apocalypse, I'm gonna be very mad at you.
Right. Okay. So with our one shot, where we watch and analyze videos in order to discuss about, we will be covering Real Witch Reviews Sabrina and Other Witches from TV and Movies by BuzzFeed Video. Now, to be clear, we aren't attacking anyone. We are simply doing this for argument's sake and argument's sake alone. Again,
Yeah, and I'll be perfectly fair to the lady they got to do this. She seems like she knows her shit. She seems like she knows her shit a lot better than most garden variety woo woo Wiccan types. So good on you, BuzzFeed, for at least finding someone who appears to, at least on the surface, know her shit. I do have a few criticisms for her, but those criticisms are mostly kind of one witch to another sort of criticism.
Aren't you technically a warlock?
Technically, if we're operating under that lingo, yes, probably. But
I was
Huh?
asking. I was just asking. I wasn't sure.
Well, there are a lot of terms that I could and often do identify with. So yeah, if we're going in the witch warlock binary, I suppose that's more accurate. But um, fortunately, witch has sort of become a unisex term for a practitioner of low magic, especially recently. I think because a lot of people have realized that warlock comes from an Anglo-Saxon word for traitor, and it became very awkward. Though I don't necessarily dislike it. It's just not a term I often use for myself. Then again, I don't really often use the term witch either. I prefer occultist, sorcerer, wizard, or magician, depending. But because this video specifically is talking about witchcraft, I I sort of have to take out my witch credentials accordingly.
Right.
So,
Okay. So yeah, again, we are simply looking at this objectively and provide arguments when or if needed.
yeah, and like I say, for the most part, I actually kind of like this person. This person does not strike me as someone um who is what I call a coffee shop Wiccan, going through what again I call a Ouija board phase, because everyone at some point in their teenage years usually goes through a very light, very sort of airy fairy, irrelevant phase where they look into like Ouija boards or candle magic or something simple like that, and they often you'll see people like that start to call themselves witches even though they've barely cast a single spell. This person does not strike me as that kind of person. This person strikes me as someone who knows her shit, and her approach to such things just happens to be a little different than mine. That being said, I do have some constructive criticism from one witch to another, and so on we shall move. Also,
Actually,
fuck BuzzFeed in general, because BuzzFeed in general is cancer, but this particular video doesn't appear to be quite as badly cancer. This is a benign tumor instead of the stage 4 cancer that usually BuzzFeed specializes in.
before we do, I am going to go get some milk and cookies.
Always a good option, and that's a hilarious coincidence for reasons that I'll get into when you get back. I put a spell on you, and now you're mine. You can't stop the things I do. I ain't lying. You're wretched, golden fist, because of all the witches. I'm the worst. I put a spell on you, and now you're mine. Come, little children, I'll take thee away into a land of enchantment. Come, little children, the time's come to play. Here in my garden of shadow. Hush now, children, hush all is away. Through the head and the sorrow. Hush now, dear children, that life is this way. Murdering beauty and passion.
I have returned.
Just in time. I was running out of random things to sing in the interim.
Okay. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Yes, jack-o'-lanterns.
Witch drama is like no other drama because people curse each other when there's witch drama. Hello, my name is Sarah Lyons. I'm a witch, as you can tell, and I'm a tarot card reader. I've been practicing witchcraft for about 10 years now, and I normally...
Okay.
This, for the record, people, keep in mind this video was released a year ago.
Yeah, this one came out around last Halloween because Netflix was just about to premiere Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. I actually was planning on doing a response to this video in my channel, but I didn't really find that much wrong with it that it needed a response at the time. But who knows? A lot can change in a year. That being said, Sarah, just again, personal preference of mine, probably not the best to lead with you being a tarot card reader as your credentials, just because tarot cards can be very abstract and intuitive in terms of what little magic there is involved there, and that's generally what people mean when they refer to something as woo. Being a tarot card reader isn't the best credentials as far as magic goes. Although I'm fully convinced, having watched this multiple times, that she does other things, and that being a tarot card reader is just one of the things she does to make money at her craft, and I can't really fault her for that. So there's that. But that being said, yeah, tarot cards are a extremely abstract and woo-filled form of magic, and not exactly a good idea to lead with that as your credentials. But anyway, jack-o'-lanterns, and on we move.
Don't wear hats like this. Today, I'm going to be watching clips from several movies and TV shows that feature witches and setting the record straight on just how accurate some of those depictions are. You cursed rat! Look what you've done! I'm melting! This movie freaked me out so much when I was a kid. I mean, that is how I melt in the summer.
Oh, good. She's got jokes. She's got jokes, and it's funny. As far as I'm concerned, Wizard of Oz was one of my favorite movies growing up. And in fact, one of the things that inspired me to get into sort of the language of film in general was the fact that my VHS copy of Wizard of Oz had as it, at the end of it, this was in the era where oftentimes manufacturers would put like special features or stuff that would have gone in the special features on DVDs on the end of VHSs, so that the VHS buying crowd didn't feel left out. And my copy of The Wizard of Oz had a special at the end of it as part of the special feature section that explained the filmmaking and the history behind the filming of Wizard of Oz. And that is one of the two movies, the other one being Sleeping Beauty, that got me into the craft of filmmaking in general. So I, for one, was never creeped out by The Wizard of Oz. I always found it fascinating. In fact, I was kind of always disappointed when Dorothy would go home at the end, because I was the kind of kid who was like, but Oz is so much more interesting, though. Can't we just stay here? But personal backstory notes aside, jack-o'-lanterns.
When I'm wearing all black. Obviously, this is a little bit done up for Hollywood. It was one of the first colorized movies that people got to see on the big screen. So one of the things that they did to kind of make Oz so much more beautiful, odd, and surreal is make the witch green in it. Every time you...
Okay, this is one of the points that I'm gonna offer a little bit of a correction for her, or at least my own personal color commentary, but and that being as it may, the reason the witch is green is not to make Oz more surreal. The reason the witch is green is because, well, how to put this? It's a play on the stereotype of the crone, in witchcraft. The idea of kind of the older, haggard, wise woman, the sort of village priestess that would fill the role of the witch in medieval society. And when Christianity came in and they got to their literal demonization of witchcraft, they turned the crone into the most disgusting variation of the crone they could, and that included very often the idea of the women who practiced witchcraft having a lot of warts and lesions and being old and disgusting and decrepit. So the green coloration on the Wicked Witch of the West probably is a artistic, more kid-friendly way of depicting sort of the green pus that very often you'd see in medieval witch depiction, because of course witches were supposed to be ugly, haggard, demonic things. And so they were full of disgusting, like, lesions and things, and that would very often lead to, like, the image of green pus coming out of the skin and so forth. So that's a little bit more accurately where the green coloration of the Wicked Witch comes from. That being said, I have no major qualms with this. It's just a minor cosmetic connection that she might not have made. But yeah, I think more likely the green coloration of the Wicked Witch of the West has to do with the demonization and the disgusting nature of the medieval crone, and how ugly and pus-filled the crone was said to be in the Middle Ages. Or more accurately, or I guess more pertaining to Oz, as Glinda put it, only bad witches are ugly. Which, good on Glinda for essentially bringing sexy back literally to the concept of the witch, because of course in the 1930s the outrageous Halloween witch had sort of supplanted the sexy sorceress a la Circe or Lilith that would have that was more common earlier on there. Jack-o'-lanterns.
You see a green witch in a Halloween store, or you see people dressing up in costumes of witches wearing green paint on their face. It all goes back to the Wizard of Oz. There's no previous lore about that.
And again, I just explained that while there's no lore about it directly, it is a stylistic variation on something that very much was in vogue of witch lore for a very long time. And I don't think that if you showed the Wicked Witch of the West to anyone, any sort of layperson or peasant in the Middle Ages, that they would not be able to tell that that's a witch. And in fact, you could make the argument that in the Wicked Witch of the West case, the green skin is her personal mark of the devil, because there was a notion in medieval witchcraft studies and demonology that a witch who had contracted with the devil, as per sort of the medieval Christian notion of what a witch was, she would be marked in some way, usually in the form of like a mole or a teat or a discoloration or a disease that the witch would carry and not be affected by it. So it's possible. I can't read the mind of Frank Baum or or any of the filmmakers or anyone else pertaining to Oz, but it's very possible that in the universe of The Wizard of Oz, the green skin is an affectation of the fact that the Wicked Witch of the West delves into black magic and therefore has her quote-unquote mark of the devil, whereas Glinda does not. Jack-o'-lanterns.
I'm doing that right now.
How?
I'm a witch. I have powers. I can make these kind of things happen.
I'm sorry, I can't with the sparkles. I've never made sparkles appear in the air. I don't know what the point of that is. Just to walk in and have like glitter everywhere. It is a little accurate that when you're on a date with someone, whenever the
Okay. This criticism is more for the person who chose what videos she would watch. Why would you ask a self-respecting witch to view Charmed? Just why? Like, cause like Charmed is enjoyable on like a very B movies kind of level, like a so bad it's good kind of level. But as far as accuracy goes, like it's only outdone by like Harry Potter, basically. Like in terms of just how wrong Charmed goes. For one thing, they perpetuate the tired old myth of those with blood magic are the only people who can wield magic, i.e., in Charmed, only certain people have quote unquote powers, and everyone else is basically magically impotent entirely. Which is complete and utter bullshit, and probably my least favorite bit of Hollywood horseshit that I would like to see the end of, if I'm honest. Everyone can practice magic if they choose. It's just really fucking hard. And yes, some people are going to be more naturally inclined towards it, but that doesn't mean that anyone can't do the work and become a competent magic user. But yeah, aside from the obligatory fuck Charmed that I feel I'm obliged to give, I have no problems with this. Yes, the whole I study and practice magic does tend to be a bit of a atmosphere and conversation killer when you're dating somebody. From what little I've gathered from dating sites and the like, that does tend to be like it's either going to result in 100,000 questions, or people are going to call you crazy and slowly back out of the room kind of reactions. Those are the two reactions you get. You get the person who is genuinely confused and interested, and you get the person who is repulsed and confused. Usually a little bit more of the second one than the first one, because people are judgmental dickheads, but whatever.
Don, if I could pat you on the back, I would.
I appreciate the sentiment. Most of the time, what really does people in as far as dating me goes is when I tell them I have a disability. That does not tend to make people stick around very often, but that's neither here nor there either. Jack-o'-lanterns.
the witchcraft thing comes up, the date either gets a lot more fun or just kind of dies right there. Well, what do you do? And I read tarot cards and do witchcraft. What do you do?
Come to mommy! Fret not, fat and fixed, thou lady feline, still alive and waiting for you. Oh, thou hast waited in vain.
20 seconds, brainstormer. 20 seconds.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, and I applaud her for sort of being more comedic about this, but the awkwardness of trying to tell people you're a tarot card reader and the witch might be more to do with the fact that that's not exactly a quote unquote normal occupation. Again, I get it's annoying to have to deal with the asshole skeptics and the assholes who think you're insane or just completely unrealistic or what have you. That is a thing, and that is annoying. But in general, it might just be like even people who would be accepting of the notion of someone practicing magic probably would raise a few eyebrows over someone making a living as a tarot card reader, just because it's kind of a abnormal job, in the same way that being a YouTuber is an abnormal job. Like when I'm on dating sites and I tell people I'm a YouTuber, they kind of give me the sideways look, like, really? And then of course the first question is always, how do you make money at that? And then the awkward, I'm not really that far into it yet conversation happens, and that's neither here nor there. But enough about my incredibly damaging personal issues. I think really that it's probably just more that it's unusual often than it's people getting freaked out. But people do get freaked out, and it is awkward. But as far as I'm concerned, that's my first hurdle as far as dating go. If you can't be interested in the odd things that I'm into, then we're not going to work as a couple anyway. So it's kind of like, if you can't if you don't find me attractive enough that me being disabled is not an issue for you, then we were never going to make it work anyway. So yeah, as far as I'm concerned, that should be a rite of passage, or a purity test, kind of, more than anything. But like I said, she's mostly joking about it, so all the power to her. I've made similar jokes in the past, so jack-o'-lanterns.
Again, Dalton, I wish I could just there you.
Yeah, I know, but we always do that to each other when it gets unnecessarily dark or unnecessarily real. The obligatory staring into the abyss segments of the show, which apparently people like. So on we move. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Fail to save thy friends, just as thou failed to save thy sister.
This is one of my favorite movies. I watch it every October, and one of the main tropes throughout Hocus Pocus is Winifred's spell book, and how she needs that spell book to make them young and beautiful again. Witches having spell books, that's a pretty accurate idea. Nowadays, witches might call the place where they keep...
Let her finish that thought, and then I will respond.
Their spells a book of shadows. Flying on broomsticks is a really common trope in a lot of old witch lore. A lot of what people associate with witches comes from the old woodcuts that we would see in Europe, of women flying with other witches on a broomstick to the Sabbath. The Sabbath is the gathering place of witches.
Okay, that's enough. I have enough material to respond to. Okay, so there are two terms for a spell book that are relatively important to know if you know anything about magic. The first is grimoire, which is like a personal book of spells. And then there is, like she said, a book of shadows, which is usually the kind of book that you would pass down a family, or that you would, if you work with a coven or a group of witches or spellcasters, that's where you would basically keep the entire community's spells. I personally prefer the term grimoire because A, the term grimoire is somewhat older, and B, it has more personal, individualistic connotations, and I'm what's referred to as a solitary practitioner, in that I don't see the point in a bunch of people who only just barely have knowledge of magic performing one big spell versus a single person who knows a fuck ton about magic performing their spells quietly and in the privacy of their own personal space. I would consider working with multiple practitioners if I could find practitioners whose competency I could be assured of. But that's always been my biggest issue with group work is if you rely too heavily on group work, you essentially end up with a bunch of people who are just barely competent versus one person who is extremely competent. You essentially kind of dilute the knowledge and understanding if you spread that around too much. The sort of individualistic answer to this is the idea of the magical order, which are usually segmented down into like levels and competency barriers. So like as a person ascends in their skill level, they will ascend in the ranks of the order. I don't really see too much point in this either because, like I said, the personal aspect of magic makes it more conducive to just do things yourself when possible. But that being said, I've also networked with a lot of people who also practice magic, so I'm not like a magic isolationist or anything. I just prefer when I can do shit myself. I prefer to do shit myself. When I, need somebody to talk to, which happens because magic is important enough a part of my life that you need to talk about. You need to talk about it with somebody, and not too many people actually know shit about it. So it's useful to have contacts who know something about magic when you're a practitioner of magic. As far as the whole broomstick thing goes, like she says, there isn't much in the way of practical spell work about making a broomstick fly or what have you. Usually, it's believed that that the idea of a witch's broom is based on the fact that instead of having a staff like a traditional sort of wizard would, a witch has a broomstick, not to fly on, but to essentially use as a magical tool, either to act as an anchoring point when when they're astral projecting, or as sort of a gendered variant of the wizard's staff, in the sense of the purpose of a staff is to draw energies from higher planes down and draw energies from lower planes or the earth up, and essentially focus the energies of nature that you're manipulating using the tool of the staff. The witch's broom also tends to have a protective function, in the sense that there is a protection sort of precautionary measure done in magic called sweeping aside evil, which involves crossing a threshold into a room and sweeping from east to west to essentially clear out all the negative energies that might be in a room or in an environment, so that they can't frustrate you any further. Usually, fun fact, a witch's broom is made from the ash tree, which is said to be sacred to witches, in the same way that a wizard's staff was usually made out of either willow or oak, because that was a wood that was useful for magic going all the way back into in the Druid times. And because most women magic practitioners were practitioners in the home, most of their magical implements were things you could find in the average homestead, whereas the average male ceremonial magician had more specialized tools that were made specifically for magic. So it was useful for a witch's broom to have more than one use, because it was supposed to be kind of a household item for the purposes of folk magic. which is kind of informal in nature. But jack-o'-lanterns.
Don't literally ride a broomstick, but the Sabbath isn't really a physical place. The way that a lot of witches were said to fly to the Sabbath was by rubbing a flying ointment on themselves. And this flying ointment contained herbs that we now know to be hallucinogenic in nature. So things like belladonna, mugwort. Flying on a broomstick is the early modern equivalent of just tripping out. Regular skin is fine, but you shouldn't ingest it or put it on your naughty bits.
Okay. As far as I'm aware, the psychoactive effects of the mugwort are too mild to call hallucinogenic. That's just a minor quibble. I know what she's talking about, and that's fine. As far as the Sabbath and all that jazz, a Sabbath is basically any sacred day or time or meeting place. And obviously it isn't specific to witches because, of course, in the Bible, for those in our audience who might be Christians, it of course says not to work in the or on the Sabbath, because in Christianity and also Judaism and I believe Islam as well, although I'm not entirely sure on that one, Sunday is set aside as a universal Sabbath for basically everyone. In the case of witches or magical practitioners, Sabbath usually tends to be days around the year when the forces of nature were said to align in particular ways. Oddly enough, Halloween or Samhain or Samhain is probably the most famous Sabbath day for pre-Christian or pre-Abrahamic cultures. And most Western secular holidays have their roots in pre-Abrahamic holidays. So there's that. As far as what she's saying about the flying ointment and the astral projection thing, that is mostly true. And in fact, the purpose of a flying ointment, in air quotes, was essentially as an aid for astral projection, because often people struggle with projecting their consciousness outside of their body, because we as physical beings sort of have a tendency of tying our awareness to our body and not really being able to extend it out any further. Part of what you learn fairly early on in magic is to project yourself out of your body and to go elsewhere. And the flying ointments were essentially a aid to that, or a it was sort of like greasing a wheel. It was supposed to make astral projection easier, or getting out of your own mind easier. Most modern flying ointments, though, obviously have found substitutions for the hallucinogenic roots and herbs and things. Some people still use them, and to be fair, I don't think that this is something specific to witches, or at least not in the European sense, because some of the earliest forms of spirituality was what's referred to as shamanic journeying, where a shaman would take quote-unquote hallucinogenic plants as a means to have access to spiritual dimensions. And of course, the shaman was the earliest form of priest, and was also the earliest form of magician in like tribal societies and shit. So the idea of astral projecting as a means of like spirituality isn't just hallucination, it's also probably the oldest form of spirituality, if we're being technical. The oldest form of spirituality is shamanic journeying, and essentially meeting your gods halfway was the sort of idea of it. As far as going to the witches' Sabbath in a modern context, most groups of witches just practice their Sabbath Sabbaths IRL. Although I have been doing some research into dark magic, or what's referred to as the left-hand path, and I know of at least one book, which is called the Book of Mephisto, where where one of the rituals is an old school medieval style astral Sabbath. So yeah, there is some accuracy there anyway.
Don't,
Sorry.
don't. I'm going to say it because your friend. Do not summon any demons.
What kind of idiot do you take me for?
I don't know. You could accidentally do it. Though I would
Okay.
imagine that would have to be a pretty big fuck up, and I don't really think you're that capable of doing it.
Okay. For one thing, since you brought this up, summonings are fucking hard. Like, evocation, which is just a fancy word for a summoning spell, basically, is one of the more high end like heavy ritual spells that a practitioner of magic does. And to be fair, I've just started, like, well, I shouldn't say I've just started. I've been working on it for years, but I've been really heavily studying evocation for quite a while now. Unless you're a colossal idiot, the idea of accidentally summoning anything is fucking hard. Unless the thing in question wants your attention and wants to be summoned by you, then it can essentially summon itself. But going out of your way to summon something is fucking hard. So don't worry about that. And also, you shouldn't worry about me in regards to that either, because I am working on being able to handle myself in that regard. One of the books I'm getting the next time I have the opportunity to get books on magical subjects is a book on exorcism rituals. So I have myself guarded to the gills as far as that goes.
If you can somehow summon angels or like beings of that spiritual nature, I am coming to visit, just out of a curiosity.
Well, I mean, I could give you some books on how to summon angels. It's well, aside from the fact that evocation itself is fucking hard, it's not particularly difficult. Angel magic has been practiced about as long as any any Christianized form of magic has been practiced. I mean, one of the oldest kinds of magic in medieval Europe was referred to as theurgy, which is literally divine working, which, you know, heavily relied on angels and shit like that.
Like, as long as you don't get yourself killed by doing that stuff, I'm fine.
And likewise, when you end up studying some things, because I know you asked me to recommend you books, do not be an idiot with your because I can already tell that at some point in studying magic, you're going to want to try something in it out. It's just an inevitable human curiosity thing. So my only advice to you is don't be an idiot. However, because you're you, I don't really feel like I need to say don't be an idiot, because I think you are aware.
I think you really should, though. In this kind of working, I probably should be told not to be an idiot.
Yeah, that being said, as your friend and your potential mentor in regards to this subject, don't be a fucking idiot. Don't take candy from strangers, and don't take advice from demons. This is basically an equivalent statement. In spiritual terms, taking advice from a demon before you're ready for it is like taking candy from strangers. I have been studying left-hand path magic recently just because I see no reason to be particularly afraid of it, but then again, I've also been studying this shit for 13 and a half years, so I I have a fair bit of knowledge under my belt as far as that goes. And never ever summon something that you're not aware of, because that is dipshit. That is extreme dipshittery right there. But anyway, let's get back to Sarah and her thing. Like I said, I genuinely think that this person knows what she's talking about. For the most part, it's just minor quibbles that I have, and you know, it is kind of a professional courtesy kind of thing that I'm extending to her a little bit, or trying to anyway. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Little safety advice for all those little witches out there watching this. Yes, I love this movie.
Hail to the guardians of the watchtowers of the east. Powers of air and invention. Hear me. Us. Hear us. Hail to the guardians of the watchtowers of the south.
The ritual that they do at
Okay. Personal note, I fucking hate the craft. It is the most unnecessarily edgy 90s bullshit ever. They do get a fair amount right, and I think that's what she's gonna go into, especially with her with the ritual, that the clip they just played there. I suspect she's going to tell. Actually, let's just have her do her explanation, then I will add whatever needs to be added afterward.
Mm-hmm.
the beat, actually of a very common ritual that you do in witchcraft called calling the corners, or drawing a circle. So in a lot of witchcraft, sort of create a circle of protection around yourself before you engage in magic, and to sort of create what's called a cone of power, wherein your magic becomes stronger, especially if you're doing it with a group of people, which they were doing. So you have to first call the four corners of the cardinal directions, so north, south, east, and west.
Okay, so she is broadly speaking right about some things in there, but she's kind of conflating a few different things. As far as that clip goes, that clip from the craft, the idea of what are referred to as watchtowers, quote unquote, comes mostly from Enochian ceremonial magic. So it doesn't really have much to do with witchcraft, which is generally referred to as sort of low or natural magic. Enochian magic is a magic that was sort of pioneered or reinvented by Queen Elizabeth's court astrologer and magician John Dee, which specifically so that he could work with angels. And later on, the ritual of the watchtowers, which is what I believe it was originally called, was adopted by Gerald Gardner, who was the founding priest, and I use priest in air quotes, of Wicca. Which the thing you've got to know about Wicca is actually a fairly modern invention. It was sort of invented during the modern hippie movement. Basically, what it was Gardner threw a bunch of old hedge magic in a blender. He threw a bunch of various different cultures, witchcraft traditions in a blender, hit frappe, and then tied it to his what essentially amounted to a feminist cult. More or less, Gerald Gardner wanted to see people naked, and therefore created Wicca as sort of a modern reinvention of older hedge magic. Wicca is a perfectly valid form of spirituality, as far as I'm concerned. Although I will say, from a magical perspective, it's a little bit lazy. In the same way that you can power a city with static qing, in theory, but relying on static qing when there are much more efficient ways of utilizing electrical energy is kind of stupid. In the same way, Wicca does tap into the same magical energies as every other form of magic, but it's kind of a lazy, ineffectual, inefficient way of dealing with it. Now back to what she was saying about calling the corners and drawing a circle. Calling the corners and drawing of a circle are two separate things. Like I said, calling the corners is a spin on the Enochian Watchtower ritual, which Gardner kind of borrowed from Enochian ceremonial magic. Oftentimes, instead of calling angels in Wicca or modern witchcraft traditions, you'll call the four elements. So you'll call, quote, the guardians of the watchtowers of the air and the fire and the water and the earth and so on. But that's entirely separate from calling a circle, which essentially involves you either actually drawing a circle, usually in either chalk or salt, or erecting a circle with energy around yourself. The purpose of the circle is essentially, like she said, to focus your own personal energies, but also to protect you from anything that might be trying to come to you from outside of the circle. As far as the whole cone of power thing, it is a thing that can be done, and the thing is, it has very little to do with actually drawing a circle. You can create a cone of power just by literally hardening your aura. There are certain methods, especially in Asia and like the eastern sort of sphere of influence, that will allow you to literally harden your aura as though it is like a force field of protection. You can do it using the drawing of a circle in ritual purposes to essentially shape your own energy back in on itself, but they're not exactly 100% related. The purpose of the circle is to sort of draw out a area of space where you are the dominant force of nature, essentially. Within your circle, you are said to be the dominant force of nature, and therefore any other forces of nature you summon from within the circle are thereby subservient to you. That's the logic behind using a circle in the first place. Also, circles, much like any other magical shape, can channel and reshape your own energy for specific tasks. Most of the time, a circle is necessary for highly elaborate ritual work, because essentially in the same way you use a transformer to step up the frequency of an electrical current when you're working with electricity, so too you use a circle to sort of step up your own life energy to make it more efficient. Anyway, that's basically all I have to say about that particular section, Jack-o'-lanterns.
Every witch practices their craft a little bit differently. No two witches are going to have the same way that they practice their craft. You could use that as a template for a ritual.
What are you cooking? Something smells handsome.
Okay, yes, but it's perfectly legitimate to make points about competency, because a lot of people use magic as a generic sort of almost psychological self-help mechanism rather than using it for any practical purpose. Like I was saying, this is my problem with like 90% of Wicca. It is technically a form of magic, but it is the weakest and like lowest efficiency way of using magic. I have known Wiccans who are extremely powerful, but essentially they are powerful in spite of the Wicca, not because of it. It's kind of like you can break through a boulder if you pick at it slowly for 100,000 years, or you can blow it apart with dynamite. There's a bit of a difference there. And likewise, like I was saying, with the electricity metaphor, you can power an entire city with static cling, theoretically, or you can get yourself a Tesla coil. In my experience, more hardened ceremonial magic is more efficient than most of the sort of love and light ephemeral magics you're going to find it practiced by the average Wiccan. And that isn't me calling out Wicca, because, you know, if it's what got you into magic and it works for you, then that's fine. But if you're specifically focused on understanding magic by its own terms and becoming competent at magic, you're going to want to take things a little bit more seriously and apply some intellectual and scholarly rigor. In the same way that if you want to study karate, sure, you could stop at the, you know, yellow belt and the white belt, and you'll have enough to defend yourself with from anyone who doesn't know how to do karate. But that's going to, you're not in any way the same or in the same league as someone with 3 layers of black belts. That's just how that works. It's a competency and intellectual rigor thing more than anything else. As far as Wicca goes, though, Wicca is just a religion that has magical elements, and a lot of different religions have magical elements to them. But A, they're not the only kind of magic, obviously, and B, you really have to be careful about drawing a line between religious aspects and magical aspects. For me personally, I don't identify with any one particular religion because I am more interested in understanding the metaphysical and the spiritual on a practical, rational, technique-based level. I'm here for the magic and only the magic, essentially, is how I always put it. But if you feel like you need to tie your magic to a religion, then that's fine too. It's just not going to net you the same results, or if it does, it's going to have to do more with you as a person than the quality of the spell work in general. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Sabrina, you're gonna love it. We're making you a dream date.
You know, it's not an uncommon thing for witches to cook up a date for someone, to use magic as a form of attraction. Inevitably, when you tell someone that you're a witch, the first thing that somebody asks you is if you can do a love spell for them. There's some controversy actually in the witchcraft community over love spells and over the ethics of love spells. Some people think that they're coercive and then therefore shouldn't be.
Yeah, I mean, she's not wrong. That is inevitably like the first thing that always comes up whenever you tell somebody that you study magic and they are convinced of it, which is in of itself a hurdle because people are fuckwits. Usually that does come up of how can you use this to benefit me, essentially, and usually the way that people want you to benefit is either can you make me win the lottery and be super successful, or can you conjure up a love spell?
You know what's weird? When I think of asking people like questions about witchcraft, love spell is literally not even on the list of questions.
Which is probably a pretty good sign for you, because that means you've avoided some of the personal gain trap. Because like the problem a lot of people have is they view magic as a means to an end rather than an end in itself. It's essentially sort of an attitude of what can this do for me on a practical basis rather than what can I do with this just for the hell of it. I personally prefer the second option there. Practical stuff is nice, but in general, I'm into magic for magic's own sake. I'm into magic because it's magic, and magic is fucking cool. It's also really, really, really fucking hard, but it's the one area of expertise that I'm decently good at. So what can you do? I feel kind of compelled and called to do this, so I do it. and she is right also in that there is a bit of, I wouldn't call it a controversy, because that there really is no witchcraft or magic orthodoxy as far as those kind of things go. But there is a philosophical issue of, is it right to manipulate someone into loving you against their will, and so on. And there's also the practical concern of, if they love you for the spell, or if the spell is what's making them love you, do they love you because they actually like you, or do they love you because the spell is enforcing that they like you? And also, the other practical concern that I always come up with is, could I have done this on my own without the boost, without cheating? Could I have made someone like me without having to resort to basically reprogramming reality to make them like me? That's sort of that's why I avoid magic as it relates to matters of the heart. But there are different kinds of love spells. There is the make this person like me variety of love spell, and then there's also the bring into my life a person who will like me of their own accord. The way I differentiate is the coercive love spell versus the causal love spell of not necessarily manipulating any one person directly, but manipulating events to bring you closer to someone who would like you via circumstance. And then there is the sort of what you could call the additive love spell, which is just, I'm going on a date and I want to look more enticing or more attractive than I could naturally. So I'm going to bolster my own attractiveness with magic by essentially putting a filter, a magical energy filter over myself to make myself look more attractive. It's a kind of magic that's somewhat related to glamours, in the sense of, you place a curtain of energy around yourself that essentially becomes a filter through which everyone sees you. And if the person is of the sex that you're going for, then they will perceive you as more attractive, because they're essentially perceiving you through a filter that changes how you're perceived by other people. That's probably the least controversial variety of love spell, and the one that I'm most likely to use if ever I felt like I needed to. But more often, I'm just like, I'm more interested in doing this myself, so I'm not going to use the cheat codes of reality, as it were. I'm gonna do a dry run, and then if it fails on my own merits. It is usually my approach, but that's just my approach. And if anyone disagrees, I can't really fault you for it. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Oh, I was gonna say, like, the first question that pops into my mind is, what kind of magic do you do, or study, or whatever?
Most of the kind of things that I do revolve around causing direct results. Like, I'm gonna have to do a couple.
Dalton,
And
that was just my the question that pops into my head. It isn't about like a love potion or anything.
Right, but
that was just me posing that. That wasn't a legitimate question. I'm sorry.
Rhetorical. Okay.
Yeah.
Moving on.
One day you'll let me know. I know.
Yeah.
But some people also think that it's just the equivalent of maybe putting on a little bit of makeup and wearing some nice perfume. That it's not so much about making someone fall in love with you, but it's more just about, opening up the doors and allowing something like that to come into your life, perhaps. I have done a love spell, yeah. I've done kind of attraction spells for myself. I'm going out on a date and I really want it to go well. I might light a candle. I might say a spell. I might.
Okay, and again, I think she's kind of going down the same route that I did in relation to this. But the one caveat that I think it's important to keep in mind here is that all three of those, the three that she mentioned and the three that I mentioned, are three different kinds of spells. There's a different structure to those spells and how the energy is supposed to be manipulated as a result of those spells. So to say that all love spells do one thing or do another thing is kind of sketchy and a little bit duplicitous, because there are different kinds of spells to get you different kinds of results. If you want the kind of spell that's going to be coercive and allow you to essentially control someone's feelings, there are spells for that. But if you want the kind of, I just want reality to kind of push a person that I will like more in my direction so that we'll have more of an opportunity to meet, there are also spells for that. And if you essentially want to doll yourself up with magic, then there are spells for that. But they are three different kinds of spells. It's not an either or situation. It's a, which kind of spell do you want? Okay, proceed to this spell or that spell or the other spell, depending. And no, I've never done a love spell on anyone, for the reasons I've laid out. I kind of want to make sure that when I meet someone who likes me, I want them to like me for me, not because they were coerced into liking me by forces beyond their control. Plus, recharging a love spell is a bitch, and I don't want to have to essentially keep the person I like magically roofied for the rest of their lives.
Huh.
Yeah. Jack-o'-lanterns.
I do something of that sort. Personally, if I want someone to fall in love with me, I want it to be because of me and not be necessarily wondering if it's because of a spell. The soundtrack for this show is so good. Oh my god, I want all their outfits. This is just a Vogue photo shoot.
See, I totally agree with the last thing she said there, and this is why, despite I think our differences in approach to magic, I would probably end up really liking this person, because she seems to, we seem to be of the same mind when it comes to like practical concerns and stuff. I don't know what show she's referring to though in this case, so
American Horror Story.
Oh, I probably should watch that at some point because I've only seen like clips of it. Hopefully I can do some videos on it for my channel one of these days. But that's neither here nor there. Let's see what her reaction to things is, and then I will jump in from there. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Oh, Jessica Lange. I mean, is there anyone cooler? The idea that modern witches would burn one another alive if one transgressed sort of the rules of a community or a coven isn't accurate. That's murder. And I don't...
Well, aside from it being murder and therefore morally wrong, it's also practically wrong because that'd be like the equivalent of a person being excommunicated from like a Jewish synagogue and then being gassed to death. It's just like the irony levels would be off the charts. Although I have read about and also heard of which the disputes between magical practitioners tend to be a little bit extreme. So if anyone was going to contrive it so that someone would be burned alive, it would probably be a vengeful magical practitioner. Although people of that variety probably are more of the left-hand path persuasion. I do know of a particularly nasty incident in history, allegedly, between between Helena Blavatsky, who is a famous witch of the like late 19th, early 20th century, and Aleister Crowley, whereby one of them got so pissed at the other that they put them in what was called an occult prison, which is basically a thought form pattern where you essentially rob someone of magic via cutting off their access to sort of universal energy. And from what I remember of this story, this lasted for years before, I think it was Blavatsky who was under the occult prison, before she found a way out of it. So yeah, witch disputes can get a little bit nasty, but if ever someone of that persuasion wanted to burn someone alive, they wouldn't tie someone to a stake and do it that way. They would probably contrive it so that they would have extremely bad luck and their house would have like a short or something and their house would burn down with them inside it. That is probably how a genuine magic practitioner would choose to burn someone alive if they had to. Not advocating for that, obviously, just saying if you wanted to do that as a magic practitioner, there are a lot less conspicuous ways to do it without tying someone to a stake. That's for the Puritan assholes from several centuries ago. Fuck 'em.
Well, that was Spanish Inquisition.
Yes. And no one expects the Spanish Inquisition, apparently. All is right with the world again. My bad puns are being reacted to in the appropriate way. Huzzah.
Alright. Jack-o'-lanterns?
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Know anybody who's really down for that, having a ritual sacrifice of someone? Isn't something that I know about anybody doing, but hey, maybe I'm getting invited to the wrong party, right? I have cursed people. It is not something I do often because the couple of times I've done it, I've really fucked up some lives.
Yeah, fair. That's there not really any criticism of that section. Yeah, that's fair. Cursing is to be avoided, generally speaking, both because, the moral implications of cursing someone. If you curse someone and then they die, are you liable for murder, et cetera, that kind of disgusting kind of philosophical question and so forth. But also because cursing can be extremely difficult. Like, most worthwhile magic is very difficult to do. So it takes a lot of time, effort, energy, and ingredients to pull off big, noticeable spells. So the question becomes, how wronged were you by this person, and how much effort are you going to put into fucking them up as a result of them fucking you over? And in my experience, the advice for cursing someone is, generally speaking, unless they have done something truly reprehensible to you, don't. It's not worth it. It's not worth the energy. And what's more, in many kinds of magic, there's this thing called the rule of three, whereby any magic you do will come back to you threefold. So if you curse someone, you will end up having to deal with 3 times as bad of a curse upon yourself if you operate within the parameters of the rule of three. If you don't, then that's a different matter. But if you do, then you're fucked. So generally speaking, if you want to curse someone, ask yourself, are they worth it? And what did they do to deserve it? If you can't come up with a substantive answer to either of those questions, don't. It's not worth it. They're not worth it. And you shouldn't drain yourself just because you're pissed. Jack-o'-lanterns.
There's a lot of ways to go about laying a curse on someone or laying a hex on someone. What a binding spell is kind of just keeping someone exactly where they are, stopping someone in their tracks so that they can't bring harm to you anymore. A really common way to do this is to take a photo of someone and wrap them up in like black tape and then put them in the back.
Yeah, binding spells are probably the simplest, lowest, and sometimes, well, actually, the competence of a binding spell of that kind is going to depend on the person casting it, which is why I know for a fact many New Age hippie Wiccan type practitioners have done that kind of binding spell to Trump, and it has done exactly bunkus to stymie him because they aren't competent in magic to begin with, and therefore their spells mean jack shit. They don't know how to manipulate the energy appropriately, so their spells either collapse under minimal weight or they aren't erected in the first place. That's spell casting 101 advice, folks. If you want to study magic, don't run directly to casting shit. Make sure you're competent at magic first, then run to cast shit. I personally, as far as hexes and curses go, would be slightly a little bit more vindictive. I wouldn't stop at a simple binding. And this is again why I avoid using curses on principle. I know of several curses in hoodoo in particular that are simple and nasty. For one thing, there's a formula in hoodoo that is literally supposed to lead to someone being damned. There's a damnation formula in one of the spell books I have. Never used it. Never considered using it. I did recommend it to someone I knew that was sexually assaulted once, though, because he wanted to curse the person who had done it to him, and if curses are useful for anything, it has to be useful for something like that. I don't know if he actually used it or anything, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, curses can be particularly nasty. I find binding spells to be kind of the simplest, sort of lazy form of it and the most common form of it. And it's very dependent on the competence of the practitioner in general, which is why I prefer more complex spells that rely a little bit less on the competence of the practitioner. That way, if I'm exhausted, there's still a good chance my spell will have an effect, as opposed to having to basically rely on my own abilities being 100% all the time. It's extremely vexing. But anyway, moving on. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Back of your freezer because you're freezing them right where they stand. Oh, I'm so excited for this show. I love the comics.
Are you willing to forsake the path of light and follow the path of night? It's very tempting.
Okay, so before she gets to give her 2 cents on the whole Sabrina thing, for one thing, the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is heavily based on the medieval notion of witchcraft, which involved people selling their souls to the devil or a devil. That really is not often a thing. Generally, even what I know about demons are not interested in your soul. They are interested in some kind of practical offering. Like in a lot of demons' cases, it's blood of some kind. A lot of demons you can satiate just by pricking your finger and bleeding on their sigil or in the triangle, in the circle. where they're manifesting and that we find and so forth. Most demons are not interested in your soul, because apart from taking you to whatever afterlife they are connected to, and having you essentially serve them for all eternity, them buying your soul doesn't really have any practical use to a demon, so why would they care? But even that being said, you don't tend to make lifelong pacts, and you certainly don't need to make lifelong pacts with any entity. Usually a magical pact is like any other contract or business arrangement. You and the other party work out the terms when you call them, and if the terms are agreeable, then you both sign it, and it works just like any other contract. There is absolutely no need to sell your soul or anything for magical powers, because, as I've often stated, the source of magic or magic itself is the manipulation of life energy, which, being living beings, everyone is endowed with. So, in actuality, I have a theory in regards to supernatural. That's the big lie of most demons in the show Supernatural. They convince people to sell their souls, and they give them powers. But the thing is, the powers they get as a result of selling their soul is minor in comparison to the powers they could have gained had they just mastered their soul instead. I do know of a few spells that are specifically for the purposes of pact magic. And in the realm of like classical demonology, there is one particular demon who is said to be the demonic lord of pacts. He's also said to be the prime minister of hell. His name is Lucifuge Rolfocail, and he's most heavily associated with the French grimoire that is either called the Grand Grimoire or Le Dragon Rouge. It was originally published in French. In English, it's referred to as the Red Dragon. As far as other pact magic and summoning goes, in hoodoo, conjure, and like American folk magic, the easiest way to summon a spirit to work with is by finding a crossroads, usually a dirt road crossroads, and performing a summoning there, which goes back to the idea in ancient Greece that every road had a spirit associated with it. So essentially, in ancient Greece, you could literally make a bargain or a pact with the spirit of a lake or a river, or the spirit of a road, hence the tendency to make bargains at crossroads and so forth. But pact magic is A, unnecessary, B, usually not permanent, because usually all contracts have a term limit, and C, aren't going to cost you your soul in general. They're going to cost you something practical, because it's just a business arrangement that's done for spiritual purposes. And you don't need to sell any part of you for magical power, because as a living being, you already have all the potential magical power you could conceivably need. And if you need help or assistance in for practical reasons, then there are dozens of spirits who are willing to help you that probably won't even consider your soul a form of payment. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Ooh, I'm so excited. Ooh.
I can't do this.
That's like everything I want in a TV show. I read the comics, so I know a little bit of what nefarious things that she gets up to, poor girl. In this one, Sabrina's having her friggin' birthday with the devil, He's invited to the party, right? In Wicca, which is a religion that you...
like I was saying, there is absolutely no need for any kind of demonic pacts at the start of Magic or any other time during Magic, and even if there are demonic pacts involved, the demon usually doesn't give a shit about your soul and just wants what anyone entering into a contract would conceivably want. You do something for me, I do something for you. We part ways and we go home happy, and if we develop a friendship or a business relationship along the way, that's fine. Most things, most spirits you're going to find aren't going to specifically want to screw you over. That being said, if you're looking for spirits to contract with, my first instinct wouldn't be to go with a demon. They are darker entities. Dark doesn't necessarily mean evil, but it does tend to mean like tricky and conniving and essentially self-centered. So thing to keep in mind. I think what she's about to get into is that Wiccans don't believe in the devil. Like, as a concept, there is no devil in Wicca. And that is perfectly true. A lot of practitioners don't even believe in the devil in practical terms. Even most Satanists don't believe in the devil as a actual entity. Most Satanism is what's referred to as atheistic Satanism, which is a kind of it's a kind of pseudo religion meant to troll Christianity, in the sense of they don't believe in the devil as a actual being. They believe in the devil as a metaphor for the animalistic, hedonistic qualities of human beings. Essentially, to them, getting in touch with your inner devil is getting in touch with your baser self-serving impulses. And for those Satanists who are theistic, i.e., they believe in an actual devil and they purport to serve him, most left-hand path magic is about personal success and validation, i.e., on the left-hand path, you're in it mostly for yourself. And so you don't really serve anyone. You try to make the best of your own life and are willing to go to whatever lengths you need to go to get that, and therefore don't really consider morality as far as it pertains to magic. I find most people on the actual left-hand path to be a little bit reckless and a little bit too cavalier. I agree with them on the philosophical aspect of it, of, individualism and making your life good is a perfectly amiable goal, but there's a difference between individualism and self-destruction, and I think too often the left-hand path, or being directly committed to the left-hand path, leads more to the kind of self-destructive, self-indulgent kind of hedonism, more so than the constructive kind. But to each their own. I'm sure there are demons that are perfectly reasonable and perfectly eloquent, just as there are angels who are complete and utter assholes. I always like to say there are good people and there are assholes on every plane of existence. No matter what kind of entity you're dealing with, it's probably best to view them on an individual by individual basis. That being said, a demon's a demon, so read the warning labels as it were, because a demon is still a demon, and they're kind of predestined to fuck you over, even if they don't necessarily try to. But that's neither here nor there. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Uses witchcraft as a part of it. There really isn't a figure called the devil. Most Wiccans don't believe in the devil. They worship a god and a goddess. And often the god is depicted as sort of a horned god, so maybe looking kind of devilish, but a lot of witches do worship the devil or do use the devil in their craft when they're talking about the devil.
Yeah, and like I got into with the whole Satanism and how they view the devil as a metaphor for like hedonistic impulses thing. That's usually how the devil is thought of by these kind of people as well. The devil is more a metaphor or a template or a model than it is a actual being. And as far as why the horned god of Wicca looks demonic, it's because the Christians, when they came over to England and converted everybody, took the gods of those cultures and they made them they took aspects of pagan nature deities and made them synonymous with the devil to basically discourage people from worshiping the nature spirits that they had always worshipped. The horned and goat-hooved devil that we are aware of in like medieval art and architecture and so forth is probably most heavily a take on Pan, who is a Greco-Roman nature deity who was famous for really enjoying sex because he was a satyr. The devil, obviously, in Christianity is said to be a fallen angel, so there's absolutely no reason why he would look like a satyr, except for the Christians needed to demonize pagan nature gods so that people wouldn't continue worshiping it. So they said, "Oh, that's an interesting aesthetic for a nature god. That's what our devil looks like now, because we say so. So if you're worshiping that, then you must actually be worshiping the devil, even though we took your god as the basis for our devil. Don't look behind the curtain, derp." So yeah, the reason why the devil looks like a satyr is more for political propaganda reasons than anything relating to how the devil actually looks. But like I said, Wicca is a fairly modern invention, and you can kind of see that in the oversimplification of the god and the goddess archetype. Obviously, before Christianity, most cultures were, or not even before Christianity, before the Abrahamic religions, most cultures were polytheistic, which meant that they believed in many gods of many different things. And Gardner, in his anthropological research, basically boiled all gods down to either part of the sacred feminine or the sacred masculine. Hence why in Wicca there's considered to be two gods, one male and one female, as opposed to many other gods. I don't put much stock in Wicca. I think it's mostly religion and not very heavy on the magic. But for what little magic there is in Wicca, I find it to be perfectly useful, just like every other culture's take on magic is. I'm more interested in magic and understanding spirituality and metaphysics from a practical perspective than I am religion, which mostly revolves around narratives. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Sort of the figure at the crossroads who's an initiatory figure into the world of witchcraft. If they decide to pull on a real dark lore,
With pleasure.
as it kind of seems like they're doing here. If we can really do things.
Sorry, I totally say this thing.
It's fine. Yeah, like she said, most of the time in most people's practice, the devil, if there is one, is considered mostly a metaphor. As far as the left-hand path goes, obviously their magic is heavily concerned with demons and what's referred to as the draconic perspective. Draconic being a spin on dragon, of course. And so there are plenty of demons who are directly supposed to initiate you into the left-hand path, in that sort of sphere of influence. In particular, in that book of Mephisto I mentioned earlier, it's said that Mephistopheles is supposed to be an initiator demon. I bring that up because I found in what little research I've been doing on the left-hand path, I found that the folks over at a website called Become a Living God appear to be fairly knowledgeable as far as the left-hand path goes. As far as people not on the quote-unquote left-hand path, there is a notion that you should have some respect for the darker forces because, in the same way as you can't have a brain that's all left brain and no right brain, so too you can't have a stable practice that's all light and no darkness. Because in magical circles, the darkness is sort of the hard force of will, whereas light is sort of the lighter force of ideals. And you need a balance of both will and ideal to get anything done in magic. So there is what's referred to as shadow magic, which sort of utilizes the darkness but doesn't commit to it in the way that the left-hand path magic does. You probably will at some point, if you get serious enough in magic, want to do what's referred to as shadow work on occasion, just to sort of satiate your darker impulses, in the same way that as a culture we celebrate both Christmas and Halloween. That sort of emphasizes that dichotomy, the dichotomy of the light and the dark, and balancing them and finding a happy medium in between. As I've often said, the most useful magics are somewhere in the spectrum of shades of gray rather than all dark or all light. If you completely ignore yourself and your personal interests in magic, you're never going to get anything practical done. But if you avoid every other impulse and become entirely self-devoted, you're going to be self-destructive, like Crowley, who was very, very gifted at magic, but also very, very self-involved and a wanker. So he kind of destroyed himself, which is why he died of an opium addiction with no friends in a hotel room where people didn't find him for like 3 days afterwards, because he had basically lost control of all his magic, and he was so reliant on his magic that without the control that his magic afforded him, everything went to shit.
With our minds, that's scary. So I like now that depictions of witchcraft are actually embracing more of the kind of darkness that was associated with witchcraft for a long time. The witch is an archetype and a symbol that's been with us for millennia, but maybe don't believe everything you see in the movies. When it comes to magic, and especially witchcraft, truth truly is stranger than fiction.
Okay, that's a fair ending. I have to say I disagree. I think at least on the embracing some of the darker history of magic, because so much of the darker history of magic was propaganda from people who literally wanted us to be burned alive and hung and tortured and shit. I think embracing the idea of us being devil worshippers is kind of stupid, because we were never devil worshippers, and so to kind of validate that is a bit shit. Again, I'm sure there are decent demons and people work with demons and have a good time of it, all the more power to you. But to embrace the specifically Christian view of magic is complete bullshit. We were never, at least not in the Middle Ages, devil worshippers, so you can fuck right off. And most magic that's intended to summon demons usually involves in some way subjugating them, i.e., you summon a demon and you might bind it with the name of God, i.e., you use the authority of God to basically scare the shit out of the demon to make it do what you want it to do. So even most medieval grimoires that actually summoned demons did so under the auspices of the idea of the magician being a righteous Christian or a righteous man of God being able to subjugate the demon because their God was more powerful than the demon. So that doesn't even work in the context of sort of the medieval definition of a witch. Because if you bind a demon in the name of God, are you really committing a sin, or are you just engaging in what amounts to a spiritual turf war? So yeah, I don't like the idea of us just going, hey everyone, let's make fun of Christians and embrace feminism and shit. Like, that's just, first of all, fuck off. Feminism has absolutely no place in magic. I mean, feminists are free to become magicians and vice versa, but they don't really relate to each other. I would prefer magic be non-political, if at all possible. Because magic doesn't belong to the realm of politics, it belongs to its own realm. And it's valid for its own reasons. It doesn't need cultural impact or anthropological woo to make it valid. That's just me. Are you okay there, Brainstormer?
Yeah.
Am I completely boring you? I'm sorry if I'm babbling too much.
No, it's fine. I'm a little tired. This work schedule thing is kicking my ass.
Yes, it definitely does appear to be.
Don't get jobs, kids. They'll make you unhappy. I'm kidding.
Well,
I'm kidding. By the way, I'm kidding.
Yeah, do get jobs, because being productive member of the society and making money is good. But don't get a job that is going to make you abjectly miserable.
It's not.
Get a job.
I'm not miserable. It's just I'm still getting used to the schedule.
If you get a job that is fulfilling and that will not make you tired.
Well,
if at all possible.
Dude, that's the problem. I'm always tired, even before I started the job.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically enough, I'm a nocturnal person.
Yeah, me too.
But I would prefer to get up early and enjoy the day.
Yep. Carpe that diem.
Yeah. I mean, do we have anything else to add, or shall we sound off?
No, not really. Again, I found Sarah to be mostly reasonable. I disagreed with her on a couple things, but they were mostly cosmetic disagreements. I hope her tarot reading business got a big boost from doing that video, even though she did that video like a year ago. And I guess on that note, we can do our sign-off thing. Also, I apologize if I talked way fucking too much. Because I feel like I kind of rambled more than usual. I should have watched the video beforehand like I always do, but I did not.
With that, folks, I want to say goodbye, adios, aloha, auf Wiedersehen, sayonara, peace, cheers, and
Shalom! Now fuck off.